They can't give back assets that are claimed by others.
آقای کریستوفر گفت من اینا رو به واشنگتن منتقل میکنم و در جلسه بعدی که خواهیم داشت مسئله رو پی میگیریم. دیگه اصلا خداحافظی کردیم بعد از 5-6 ساعت گفتگو.
It was September 22nd, 1980. It looked as if Carter could get the hostages home in time to boost his chance of re-election in November.
وقتی که من رفتم به فرودگاه خلبان آمد که برج اجازه پرواز به ما نداد. گفتن که فرودگاه مهرآباد بمباران شده توسط نیروهای عراقی.
The next day, Iraq invaded Iran. 70,000 troops crossed the border, launching a war which would last 8 years and leave 1 million dead. Iran's leaders broke off the talks with America. They suspected Washington was behind the invasion. They were not totally wrong.
We were warned that the invasion was imminent. A source told me that he'd just been in Iraq, where he'd been meeting with Saddam Hussein and his senior Iraqi generals, and that the Iraqis were going to invade Iran. This was, of course, big news and quite an intelligence coup for us.
America did nothing to stop the invasion. In fact, though it had no diplomatic relations with Saddam's Iraq, it allowed help to reach him.
We understood that what we were telling Saudi Arabia and Jordan about our perceptions of the state of the Iranian military would be passed to Iraq. How powerful did we think their armored forces were? Could they operate their tanks? Could they operate their surface-to-air missile networks? These were the types of information that we would provide to our friends and which we expected they would pass on to Iraq.
6 days into the war, with Iraq's forces in Iran and still advancing, the UN Security Council called for a ceasefire, but made no demand for Iraq to withdraw, giving Iranians a grievance that rankles to this day.
ممکنه یک کشور متجاوزی رو محکوم نکنن، از اون نخواهند که برگرد به مرزهات و بابت این تجاوزی که کردی غرامت بپرداز. فقط بگن که آتش بس بدید. آتش بس بدید یعنی تجاوز ما بپذیریم.
اون موقع من مسئول تدارکات سپاه بودم و امکانات می‌خواستن، اسلحه می‌خواستن، مهمات می‌خواستن، تجهیزات می‌خواستن. جنگ عراق با ایران نبود. وقتی من مأمور بودم برای پشتیبانی از سپاه امکانات تهیه بکنم، همه دنیا به صدام میفروختن.
Iran badly needed weapons, but could not buy them as long as it held the American diplomats captive. Its parliament voted to resume the negotiations with America. But the news reached Carter too late to save him from defeat in the presidential election.
I promised you 4 years ago that I would never lie to you, so I can't stand here tonight and say it doesn't hurt.
He now determined to get the hostages home in the 2 months left before Ronald Reagan took office. The negotiations moved to Algeria. The final sticking point was $9.5 billion of Iranian government assets in American banks, frozen by the US government when its embassy was seized.
I said to the foreign minister, the most we can assemble is $7.9 billion. And I think it's in their interest to accept that, because dealing with President Reagan might be much more difficult than dealing with us.
It was the Americans' final offer.
After 2 days and 2 nights of negotiation, I'd gone back to my room to shower, and I got a call from the foreign minister saying, I think we have an acceptance. So I went back and signed in the clothes I'd been wearing for 3 days.
But Iran would not release the hostages until America delivered the money, and Carter was leaving office in 36 hours.
There were immense technicalities that had to be dealt with. Banks in like 4 different countries, all of these escrow accounts, and we'd just about come to the conclusion that nothing could possibly be done, that they were just going to have to deal with the next administration.
I never went to bed at all. I stayed up and I was in charge of every detail of the agreement. That ought to be kept firm.
The $7.9 billion of frozen Iranian assets, now held in banks around the world, still had to be retrieved.
One of the key ones was the Bank of England, because they were holding about $2 billion of gold bullion that was owned by Iran. Tell them I would like to know from the President or Chairman of the Bank of England why they have held up our hostage. We had to get Mrs. Thatcher to agree to let that $2 billion be in the pot. Okay, so the Bank of England has certified the depository? Right on, man. That's great. That's great.
That was one obstacle overcome. There were more.
Suddenly, the lines went dead. Nothing was happening. We found out that there was a U.S. Treasury official who didn't like the deal, whose signature was necessary to move the papers forward, who went home. So the President of the United States said, this person is fired, and so we got past that.
The hostages had been held for 15 months, often in solitary confinement. 2 hours before Reagan's inauguration, they were assembled.
We were all blindfolded. I can remember my irritation with one of the hostage takers who were pushing us on the bus, because we were always being pushed around.
The hostages tore off their blindfolds and saw they were on the road to the airport. In Washington, the Vice President and President prepared to leave for Reagan's inauguration.
As I left the Oval Office, there was Gary Sick sitting by the President's chair, in his own smaller chair, on the phone, waiting to see if there's any news about the hostages.
I was listening with one ear to the reports coming out of Tehran about where the hostages were and what was going on.
The hostages reached Tehran airport.
Prodded, poked at, screamed at by dozens of hostage takers, prison guards between the bus and the ramp up to the aircraft. We hadn't seen each other for 444 days. All of us embracing each other, getting to know each other again.
But the plane sat on the runway.
Carter was despairing because he had hoped at least to get these hostages home while he was president.
We rode in a limousine to the Capitol for the inauguration ceremony. I had direct communication, obviously, with our intelligence around the world.
I talked to him while he was in the car. Said that the hostages were apparently at the airport, but we had no evidence that anything had happened.
Repeat after me. I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President.
Carter left for home. Still no news.
Roughly 5 minutes after I was no longer president, the Secret Service agent came down and whispered in my ear that the hostages were free.
They had deliberately delayed its release until maybe 20 seconds after Reagan had been sworn in.
It is not often that a foreign leader humiliates and helps secure the electoral defeat of an American president. Ayatollah Khomeini had laid down a pattern of intransigence that continues to this day and still bamboozles the West.
On BBC 4 now, an absorbing insight into life inside modern Tehran. Raghi Omar reveals the hopes and fears of the upcoming generation, from a pop star to a renowned photojournalist and staff at a drug rehab centre.